the role of any team, any company, any entity in an organization is to innovate.
How can you balance the innovation with keeping, the current product that's kind of works already?
There's the other thing where things are working amazingly well, but they will be broken if you don't do anything about it.
How do you select how much to focus on code dev versus innovation versus maintenance or whatnot?
Tech debt really is everything that gets in the way of flow.
Let's talk about your take on the current agile practices.
There's a meme, right? Agile is dead. Long live Agile.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Lyoshin podcast. Today's guest is Panyam. He's an engineering leader with over 20 years of experience building products from games and mobile platforms to distributed systems for startups and big organizations like Google and LinkedIn. Welcome, Shri. Nice to have you here.
It's a pleasure, Vit. Very nice to meet you.
Great. So I invited you today to talk about engineering leadership and challenges in the modern software development and also your current take on agile practices. So, but before we start, can you please share a little bit of your professional journey and the work that you do now?
Yeah. I started my career a long time ago as a network designer for one of Australia's largest telecom called Telstra. I was literally configuring switches, configuring, routers, setting up data centers. I know it sounds big, but data centers were probably as big as maybe this house times 3 or 4 stories or 4 floors, right? And naturally, volume being low and scale being low, that was enough. I moved on to doing more embedded systems work, device drivers and printing drivers and so on. And until as recent as 15 years ago, I was working a lot on embedded systems and games and non-web, non-distributed systems, non-service stuff. I got my break into web services or the so-called modern stack when I was doing my first startup in Sydney about 14 years ago. It was called Street Hawk. It was a location-based marketing platform where we would match you as a customer, your preferences with retailers around you based on location. The idea was at the time iOS or Apple's mobile platform, mobile OS came up with location-based APIs. Right? After that, a lot of learnings. I moved to the US to work in Amazon in their payments platform. My real first exposure to large-scale distributed systems. Amazing set of learning. Kind of seeing how agile and modern software development practices were evolving from the olden days of, everything being high performance but a single box to 1,000 boxes, right? And then I did another startup, which led me to my stint at LinkedIn, where I first managed the feed. I was leading the feed team, mainly around social actions, where likes, comments, follows, and so on. And from after that, I moved back to management, managing the profile team. The profile is or we call the identity platforms, where your LinkedIn profile is your identity, right? At that time, we had around 650 million LinkedIn members. So the profile was the heart of all that, right? It was used by about, I believe, over 100 internal teams in some shape or form. Right? From then, I moved on to Google, managing a few teams on in cloud data flow. I learned so much about building control planes, building, for, on, in the cloud. And then recently, like right now, I'm the CTO of Diagnose, where, I've taken all that knowledge in building control planes and distributed systems and, building, teams all over the world, to apply AI on building runbooks and automation and removing toil for a lot of customers who may not have the most modern practices in their organizations. So helping them modernize and evolve and get the best practices into them. So I'm excited to share about the learnings and pains and battle scars and everything else. And hi.
Yeah, that's great. You've done it in many different environments and many different organizations. So that's great. You've seen many different industries too. So why don't we start with engineering leadership topic and talk about the innovation and how leaders can foster innovation with their teams and just promote that idea.
Yeah. There's a really good book on this matter. It's a bit old, and clearly old as anything over 2 years. It's called The Art of Scalability, right? And the thesis in that book, which really grabbed my attention, was that the role of any team, any company, any entity in an organization is to innovate. It sounds almost counterintuitive when you think of an organization's role is to just make money, right? And this amazing book argues that innovation is number one. If you innovate, everything else will follow. It's like that old saying: if you follow your passions, everything follows. If you follow innovation, everything follows, right? And really, clearly the book doesn't end there. It talks about how to, why it's important, how to build teams around it, how to look at various parts of what can get in the way of innovation. And again, if you think of there are many reasons why innovation is paramount, right? A few very, very obvious, a few key ways it's important is, it really is a way to endow competitive advantage, right? Because you're trying to increase revenue, reduce costs. You're trying to improve customer value ultimately, and the way you do it, the way you stay ahead of your competition, is by having an organization that is really well oiled for innovation, right? It's really that flywheel that adds to your competitive advantage, and obviously doing that gives you market leadership, improves your fiscal position, and so on. There's also a matter of innovation also helping organizations be more nimble, right, and be more adaptive to change. I don't need to tell you what the biggest buzzword in the last 2 years, 2 years are, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, we can play a game to see how long we can avoid that word in this talk. And so because most organizations start off with a thesis of what they are about and what they, what is their core purpose and so on. But market tells you otherwise. Market tells you that today it demands different things from organizations. So unless you're innovating, it's hard for you to be adaptable and resilient to that change, right? It also translates to the hard times too, not just opportunities, but hard times. When you have a crisis, when you have a unforeseen incident at scale, how do you react to it? If you are very, very, very rigid, you are not going to be able to react to that in time or in the best way, right? Obviously, in a more selfish kind of way, innovation means you are keeping your employees happy, right? I'm sure with very few exceptions, most employees do want to be associated with the bleeding edge, the cutting edge, the modern way of doing things, right? And it forms a pretty good, let's just call it a HR insurance policy against attrition, right? And which leads to kind of employee satisfaction and employees taking pride in what they're building, because it's hard things also give you pride, right? So that's important. And we talk about market changing, and market demands means customer needs are changing, right? I can't think of any product, maybe with the exception of the ballpoint pen, that hasn't changed in over 100 years, right? I was seeing this thing on LinkedIn, the biro, how it looked like in 1900, 1950, 2024, right? And the biro looks the same. I'm jealous, and at the same time, not jealous. Right? So there's hardly a product today that does not have customers having different needs. So innovation, at least the culture of innovation, gives you that mobility and nimbleness, right? So as leaders, we have this n-sided or multi-sided pressure, right? There's obviously the demand to make sure that things aren't breaking and things are stable, things are well oiled, which means that things are predictable. But at the same time, you need to ensure that this innovation engine is reasonably oiled, right? So how do you do it? That's kind of these are the few concerns on why it matters and how do we go about doing it.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's something you obviously need to innovate. It's in technology field, especially when things are evolving so fast and new technologies coming out every year, every 6 months or whatever. And as you said, engineers want to focus on want to play with those new tools, and it's hype also, right? Everybody want to put their hands on all this new stuff. But then you also have business that build something and they want to keep running it and keep making money. And if it's working, why break it, right? It's always that debate between business and engineering. So, how can you balance the innovation with keeping, the current product that's kind of works already?
Great point. For the rest of us who are not buyers, there is the fear of breaking what's working well. There is the other thing where things are working amazingly well, but they will be broken if you don't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think I should just put it out there by saying that the best book on this subject is Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That book is rife with examples of how industry leaders, right, who would find that one of their own R&D or research areas would come up with the next, parent company killing innovation, right? That which, if they had adopted, would put them as leaders for the next 100 years. Obviously, I'm exaggerating. And the companies or the organizations would choose to not go through with it. I think the example of Kodak is really beaten to death, right? I mean, they
I
came up
was
with
just
one of the
thinking
first.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think everybody, I think college engineering 101, management 101 talks about this, right?
Right.
And even the answers are known by them. I mean, people know what should be done, but it's a culture of, if you do it, how do we prioritize it? In the case of Kodak,
Yeah.
they had the digital technology first. They let it sit in the back burner for many years. The textbook answer says that, look, have a ambidextrous organization. Warning, MBA quotes, / warning. They talk about building this ambidextrous organization where this other division runs as a complete separate entity without interference, with the extent of some support to make it grow from the larger fiscal goals of the parent organization. The idea being that you have that running and growing and being ready for the market when the market is ready, so that you're not cannibalizing yourself, but at the same time you're also not destroying something much earlier on out of fear, right? Now, all the examples show that even if you destroy that new amazing thing, like even in the storage industry, there was the 2 feet floppy drive, which floppy disk that was outdated by the 1.5 feet, and then 1 feet, and then 9 inches, and then finally, what is it? I think fast forward 20 years, a USB with 50 petabytes of data, right? So the idea is that you don't let that innovation die. You don't have to starve yourself and divert every bit of funding there, but you have that offshoot growing under your own umbrella, so that when the time is ready, the transition is the path to transition is clear.
Mm-hmm.
And in that way, I think what the companies these days are doing, in terms of having their own kind of VC wings, like Google has Gradient Ventures, Microsoft and OpenAI partnership is very, very famous. Amazon has its own investment in a bunch of partners as well as potential acquirees down the future, right? and they had their own
Yeah.
internal efforts, right? I mean, Apple had Siri, which is still going on. By the way, I have no affiliation with any of the companies, so this is just my reading of what I'm reading, right? So
Okay.
yeah, so I think having that, having that offshoot is key, right? But the other thing about fear of failure was, the culture matters. If in your company people are punished for taking risks, right? If people are berated for, going off track, even in the short term, then naturally your employees are not going to take on any effort, right? Like, sorry, any effort to try new things, right?
Yeah.
You'll find
Yeah.
that employees who, with the right motivation, will go above and beyond uh, on their own time, on their own dime, to try something else, try something new, if they know that
Mm-hmm.
they won't be punished, let alone rewarded, right? In my own team at LinkedIn, we had many projects. Again, not world changing, but very impactful projects for LinkedIn that came out of in days. In days are this amazing time at LinkedIn where every third Friday of the month is do what you want day. Like literally, do what you want. Do what you want to do day. So people go hiking, gardening, focus on learning, focus on their own well-being. Um, some teams work on really interesting ideas that they not otherwise have time normally, right?
Yeah.
So that's only possible if what comes out of it isn't berated, isn't looked down with the utmost scrutiny, right? The other thing is obviously funding. Like, how do you fund this? We talked about at large scale what happens, but when you have this ambidextrous or little offshoot coming up. But at a team level itself, as leaders, we can help, both align what the team members want to do and like doing, and what's in their 1 to 5 year plan, and look at and tie those interests to how you can grow the team's charter, or how you can grow the team's mission and purpose. Um, you know, at Google, with demo days and hack days, I know Google had that 20% time a while ago. But most recently, hack days and demo days are great vehicles of showcasing what people are doing, and then using the feedback on that to fuel future products. That is helpful. The other one is, I remember one time at Amazon, I was very lucky because my manager was. I mean, I had moved from Australia. I had never been a manager before, so I was pretty brazen.
Mhm.
Um, and I thought I can just go and build something, right? I can just go and build this entire, stack on my own, and I did. But what was amazing about that was not that I built it; it was that my manager and his manager, they gave me an opportunity to present that to the VP. Right? Imagine somebody sticking their neck out like that for you.
Mhm.
Like that made me work harder than anything else, right?
Yeah.
So I've been fortunate to kind of experience that and use that experience to give my team the same opportunity. And again, some work, some don't work. When they don't work, you learn from it. When they do work, you celebrate and grow from it. Right? So I think
Yeah.
there's that fear, but as leaders, we can help.
So another thing is about managing the tech debt. First of all, what does it mean? And then also, how do you balance it or manage it, and how you pay it off and things like that?
Right. I think everybody talks about this, as a well-oiled F1, like Formula One car race where there's a pit stop and everything
Mhm.
goes smoothly, and I think a wheel change happens like 4 seconds. By the way, I'm not going to use that example because I have no idea about Formula One. I've just seen how awesome they do it, but I'm sure the mechanic, like what you see, is not what really goes on, right?
Yeah.
You can think of, if you think of software engineering teams, or really engineering teams, right? The tech debt is tech debt. I said tech doubt. Tech debt is really, I suppose it is in a way of doubt too, right? Tech debt really is everything that gets in the way of flow, right? And flow is this, again, a very qualitative description of what it would look like if engineers were focusing on the thing they wanted to focus on without interruptions, without operational concerns, right? And operational concerns could be build failures and test failures and production issues and meetings to some extent, personnel kind of conflicts, like all that. If those weren't there, what does the team look like? What is the team doing, right? The team is doing the thing that they really want to do the most, helping, improving the customer lives and helping the organization, gain value, right? But clearly, as things grow, as that little ball of mud kind of grows, it attracts a lot of things. It attracts a lot of artifacts, right? So you end up seeing decreased velocity in how quickly teams can come up with implement an idea and realize it all the way into production, where the customers, like where every one of the customers can experience it, right? And there's many phases in this life cycle, right? Now, as you see reduced velocity, if that is looked down, or if it's looked down with this lens of fear and finger pointing, you might start slipping on your code quality, right? You might cut corners. You might end up, skipping some things because you want to ship things faster, just for if that's the only metric you care about. Now, this has like a flywheel effect where lower quality means more bugs, and you spend more time, fixing things. So the overall, cost of a feature has gone up, even though the time to ship has gone down, may have gone down, right? Now, we talked about innovation. We talked about how, nobody likes doing boring, grinding, non-innovative things, right? So you have impact on morale, right? Now, clearly, morale is not tech debt, but morale is a big consequence of tech debt, right? Now, when all this happens and people are shipping less features, overall, clearly the business top line and bottom line metrics are being impacted, right? So in this sense, it's very important that you actually manage tech debt, right? So as leaders, we have a role to play in that.
Yeah, I see. So then how do you select how much to focus on code debt versus innovation versus maintenance or whatnot?
Absolutely. First of all, tech debt is rightly called, so it is debt. Just like you can, before I talk about how, like what are some ways to reduce tech debt are. I mean, I like to talk about this little, is it an allegory or simile? This similarity, I suppose, right? Of tech debt with my own mortgage, right? I was lucky enough to refinance at a low rate. But if I want to refinance now, then I can either pay the money down and forego on other investment opportunities, or I can stick with it with the embarrassment of having a loan for another 30 years, but using the capital for something else, right? And tech debt is similar, right? You can aim for saying, look, I want to have, n number of nines of code coverage. You're not going to get to 100. Let's say you aim for 100, but you get to 99% code coverage. Again, what is the cost of that? If you're currently at 10%, and if the number of customers, who are being affected through bugs is at a certain threshold, the marginal cost of any marginal improvement is a big factor of how you would prioritize this, right? Not just how much effort you need, what else are you not doing by choosing to take it on, right?
Yeah.
Now, this goes back to, again, what it means for your morale. If you spend all your time, let's say you spend more time doing code reviews because no bad code goes in or no bad design should go in, right? Initially, you may not know what the impact of that is, right? But over time, you will know. Or if you spend more and more time refactoring the same code, you're not necessarily adding new features. You're making it easier to add features later on, but you aren't really adding features today, right? You can add more tests. You can actually have this huge backlog of things that are not feature work, but all these things like improving tests and improving test frameworks and improving your CI/CD pipeline and so on, right? Now, if you know that doing this is not going to help you with something on the roadmap, right? Then that in my opinion, that should have a lower probability of making activity, your selection of tasks, or making your list of priorities, right? Well, I mean, I recall once in LinkedIn, we actually, I mean, now I think there's a really famous Amazon I think it was Amazon Prime article about how they consolidated a bunch of microservices into a monolith. They went the other way around. They didn't go from monolith to microservice. They went from microservices to monolith, and they cut down a bunch of costs. Right? We did that at LinkedIn on the profile. Right? We had a couple of services that when it was first created, it was created with the grand intention of being very modular and very extensible and very pluggable across a bunch of things. But over time, our internal customers who were using the profile were, not they didn't care, they just didn't have the time to worry about how they can use it. In effect, we were maintaining two services when only one was being called by the customers, and everything else was being passed through. Now, we did have a higher number of on-call issues because of this. Double the number of services, double the number of failures. It was low, but it was still double, right? So we actually chose to consolidate them. This is like way before, the prime example and in much lower scale. And it already paid off dividends. Was there an actual customer value from that? Not immediately from feature perspective, but we were able to show both cost savings on operating this service, as well as, more freer time during on-calls, which could be eventually diverted to doing feature work, right? And this took about, it took about 3 to 4 dev months, like dev engineer months of effort for one engineer, right? So we were able to do this because it was incremental, right? Following some of the Agile practices. We were able to do it because it was in parallel to our production system. It didn't grind anything else to a halt. And in a team of 10 people, one person for 4 months in a year is 10% divided by 3, about 3% of your team's spend, right? So that was a good enough. There was good enough ROI on that. So I think these kind of things you would use to kind of look at, okay, what if I don't do something? What am I losing? If I could do something, what can I gain? And what is it going to cost me, right? And again, these numbers don't have to be perfect. You just want to have the methodology to pick these numbers, right? And then iterate on it, and then ignore the sunk cost fallacy to go, look, we've already spent 2 years on this. Do we still need to keep going, right? So it's a constant iteration of going, look, it's been done. Are we realistic about what's next? What is our confidence level? How confident are we about the confidence level? And then revisit.
Yeah.
So to me, tech debt is like feature work. And if you look at it in that lens, and then you look at what is the value of that feature, would you do it? Right?
So there is another challenge about scalability and specifically about how, on the business side, how the organization of business scaling, and then on the technical and how to catch up with them or how to do it simultaneously to make sure that when you get more users, for example, that your systems is not going to be, broken apart.
Yeah. And scalability, if you think about at the simplest kind of way, things that are more coupled are harder to scale, right? Things that are less coupled are easier to pick apart and focus on and scale, right? And if you want to get even more qualitative, it's really a function of how much you can put in your mind at a given point in time. So as you refactor, as you break things down, and as you break down, as you reduce the scope and domain of responsibility, you make it more manageable and hence more reasonable and hence more scalable. Right?
I see. Okay. Another challenge with the software development there is interoperability. So, for example, maybe you have different systems that need to talk to each other. Maybe you have some other services that are there that needs to, your product need to talk to them. How to deal with that challenge?
One of the, if I go back to a very old example, database migrations have always been painful, right? You had a schema, you would evolve the schema, you would evolve it with no compatibility or interoperability in mind. It would be a very, very manual, multi-step process. For example, databases were evolved, or schemas were evolved. There was an expectation that they would have a downtime going forward. The whole idea of maintenance windows kind of started with this. We'll do a upgrade at 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. This was very, very common as recent as 10 years ago. Right? Now, what a lot of evolutions these days involve is making schemas that are backward compatible, right? Which means that you want the new clients as well as the old clients to be able to handle any new fields you would add. And obviously, the sacrifice here is that you will only add fields. You would not drop fields or rename fields or change the optionality of fields, right? So the idea is a new client can handle this new field. Old clients would not know what to do with it, so they just would ignore it, right? So this is a very, very simple, basic example of compatibility and interoperability, right? The same happens if you think about, now if you look at microservice boundaries, it's the same thing. Now, instead of a database schema, you're talking about an API schema where you add a new field, you don't remove any fields. Over time, you'll find that when you do a V2 or a VN+1 of an API, you might want to do a cleaner API with these unused fields removed. Right now, there's a bit of a trap here. Right, people think a schema evolution from VN to VN+1 is somehow different from a new product or a new feature integration. Right? If you think about this, you have a bunch of customers who are using VX or VN of your product. If you tell them, hey, start using the next version of this thing, you're expecting, and let's say if it is breaking something, right? You are forcing, or at least you're hoping that you have enough value in the next version of the schema, API, product, and so on, that they will want to use it, right? The example in the car industry is, look, modern cars come with these amazing gadgets. Car manufacturers obviously want you to, if they had their way, they want to be the apples of cars, right? They want you to buy a new car every 2 years, right? But almost everyone's finding that after a certain point of, scalability, quality, and so on, people don't want to change products, right? They don't want to change painkiller products. They might want to change vitamin products, but not the painkiller products, right? I personally am a 20-year car guy myself, right? Not saying it's everybody, and I am the worst customer of a car manufacturer, right? But to be fair, right? I mean, there has to be a reason for me as a customer to try the new version of the product, API, schema, for it to make sense. And that's where interoperability ties in with how you're showcasing value, right? Now, for you to showcase value, you need to have everything else in place, like the innovation engine in place. To do more new features with high velocity, you got to have less tech debt, right? And to be able to do that, you need a culture of innovation, culture of moving fast. Whether I am selling it or not, you can't not mention Meta's break fast, fix fast culture, right? You need some part of that, right? So interoperability is really a function of innovation, removing your friction, and being able to move fast, right? And having a way to both build and showcase value for the customer, so they're incentivized to adopt.
Yeah, I see. Another challenge there is about security. Sometimes maybe it's about just in general security principles and best practices, and sometimes it's maybe regulations or requirements from industry, from government, or whatnot. So how technical teams dealing with that?
First of all, as a disclaimer, I'm not a security expert. Security for me has been at a higher level, more from a compliance perspective, right? It's not to say that there are no lower level aspects of it. If you look at UI development, there are I think there used to be what's called an OWASP guidance on how to build secure products, right, from a use perspective. What I can talk about is more on the data side of things. Now, I think everybody has heard about GDPR. GDPR, I know it doesn't sound like security, but it's in this large compliance umbrella, right? A big part of GDPR was how do you do takeouts, right? As in, if I'm closing my account on a popular social or public platform, how can I ensure that companies will let me take away all my data in a zip file or a tarball or something downloadable or in a CSV file, and how do you do full deletions? I want to make sure that none of my data remains behind on the platform's presence, right? And then there are issues around local regulation rules. GDPR and EU, I think, had like a 90-day requirement on deletions, on tracebacks and everything, right? So engineering teams, I think, just like good best practices on scalability and UX, it really helps to have engineering teams and engineering leaders be aware of what are the latest compliance concerns, what is the impact and timelines of those. I think GDPR had like a certain deadline after which you would be fined a few $1 billion a month or whatever, right? So being aware of that is helpful, because what this does is, it helps engineers ask, but wait, if you put this feature in, that team does not have that API to kick off a deletion request, right? So in our own roadmap, we're building this. We also need a commitment from that team to build that within a certain time frame.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't have that, obviously your product is devoid of that best practice, that that compliance requirement. But having it means that you're not just thinking about your own product, you're also pushing on that culture across the organization, right? Now you might find that if the critical team does not have that feature, should you be prioritizing it first, right? So now suddenly having that knowledge can actually help you decide what is in the stack rank of priorities in the grand scheme of things, right? So yeah, I understand that that's not really a security only superpower, but it's a big superpower. Having that training, having that knowledge, having that awareness of what is this ever-changing, I know it sounds like GPT now, doesn't it? This ever-changing landscape of security requirements and compliance regulations.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's like we talked in the beginning, right? It comes down to this balance in the innovation, balance in code debt, balance in all those regulation requirements. Like, I work for government organization. We have a lot of standards we have to comply with.
Oh, yeah.
You can't check in code until something is like, you can't even write code until something is approved and in a way how you should be doing it. There's always things like that are challenging in a way, but we have to deal with them. So
wait, I wish I knew you 7 years ago when we were doing GDPR LinkedIn. I would have asked my engineers to talk to you.
Okay, well, I'm not a security expert or government regulations expert.
Well,
but
CCPA, come on.
Yeah.
But so, good to have someone like you. Good to have someone like you in my toolbox.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So let's talk about your take on the current agile practices. You've been in the industry since the pretty much beginning of this agile movement starting. So yeah, what's your take on it and how you think it evolved over time?
There's a saying, right? I mean, there's a meme, right? Agile is dead. Long live Agile. I was gonna say, man, I've been witnessing the Agile. Well, I've been exposed to Agile with a capital A for a long time. But I realized that thankfully, and I felt that made me old. But thankfully, Agile has been there for longer, so I'm kind of feeling a bit better about myself, right? I mean, I suppose I got into Agile through TDD, test-driven development, right? I was working at a games company about 17 years ago, right? And at this time, having a QA department, not just team, was a big thing, right? Whether cloud or not, teams of QA folks would wait in this part of this pipeline. Developers would do their own basic testing, mostly biased positive testing. It runs, it works kind of testing. And then QA teams would really wear the banes of our existence, where they would scrutinize your product, and made you feel really, really insecure, right? And but if you think about it, what really happened was this comes down to us not realizing that as we were building software, we were just building without a plan, or we had a plan in the grand scheme of things. We knew what features had to be there, but it wasn't following the best tech debt reduction or um, refactoring practices or testability practices, and there's a QA guy, pass it to them kind of approach, right? So Agile, at least the way we got exposed to was through TDD and going small, going incremental, being able to reason about every phase of your product feature evolution towards the final deadline, right? Now this worked great for that industry, the games industry, the industry where you weren't like your entire product was developable. Sorry, a single team was able to develop an entire product, right? In the case of a game, it has small teams of 5, maybe 10 engineers, not including designers and so on, being able to develop a full AAA game, right? And it's easy to test across that. Now, fast forward now, if you take any modern social platform, right? It's powered by hundreds of teams, right? It's powered by thousands of engineers. It's powered by as many microservices, right? So your service never works in isolation. It runs in isolation, but it has to really respond to and communicate with so many microservices. So the best case testing you can do is, some kind of mock-based testing or some kind of component testing or some kind of minimal end-to-end testing, right? So Agile has also meant that the way we do planning and OKR planning and set up our OKR cadences has changed, right? In the beginning, you talked about 2-week sprints, have a large goal, but 2-week sprints on what's biteable, what's chewable, spit it out, right? Now it's you have to think about what is our year-long big rock. The year-long big rock is to be AI enabled across all of LinkedIn, across all of our company. And then what is a 6-month medium-sized rock? And then coming down to what is the quarterly plan, and then using that quarterly plan as your guide for mini sprints internally, right? And within all this, you have this back and forth, feed forward and feedback loops about some team that we are dependent on has committed, but their commitment status has changed, right? So now how do we react? So you'll find that a lot of time these days goes into planning and readjusting and really, reacting to the environment, the organizational environmental changes, right? So would I call that agile? I mean, it's agile in that we're not following a plan that is set for the entire year, right? Even though we have that larger North Star, we are still reacting to it at regular intervals. But it's not true agile in the sense that there's this giant backlog, and you first go through your 2 weeks, you work on that, and then pick the next 2 weeks, and assume that the backlog doesn't change, right?
Yeah.
I think there's this other meme where your backlog keeps changing, and you could safely delete the entire backlog every 6 months, and you're fine, right?
Yeah.
Because the company is here and the priorities are here, right? So.
Yeah, the idea that you would get more feedback from users when you release earlier, right? When you release every 2 weeks and you immediately getting feedback from people, your backlog evolves as well. So
that's right, and you do like releasing 2 weeks is not. Well, first of all, releasing takes longer than 2 weeks because companies not so much for the development time, but just the rollout time, right? Companies that have a billion users that their product can be exposed to, they have multiple, I think, dozens to hundreds of experiments running at any given time, right?
Yeah.
And they roll those experiments out at different cadences. You might roll it out to a internal friends only group, to a company group, to a 1%, 5%, 10, 25, whatnot. In the case of cloud products, we are talking rolling out region by region, right? Or it's pretty much like a matrix, right? You might do a global product where you're rolling out at smaller waves, or you might have a global product that really is regional in nature. So you might want to roll out one region and then go to other ones. You might have certain favorite regions, some hotspot regions, some low risk regions. Roll it out there and look at impact. The next level is how do you mix the two? If the regions that you're rolling out to, and this happens in SaaS offerings a fair bit, right? You might have customers in one region who get this feature first, but they might want to have their own kind of rollout, their own kind of gating mechanism. So you apply a second layer of rolling out for them, for your SaaS customers in that region, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that adds some exciting and interesting possibilities to what you can do in this matrix hybrid kind of rollout process.
Yeah.
And this can take up to weeks or months at a time to go fully from 0% to 100%, assuming no rollbacks.
Yeah. So then we also have these new frameworks like SAFe, for example. Somebody may claim that it's a useless framework. It's so much processes there and rules you have to comply with. And somebody may say it's a great framework for large organizations with like dozens and hundreds of teams, and it creates that cadence and structure. So how do you take that?
The reason I wouldn't call it useless is because I don't know much about it.
Okay.
And that's probably a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, in the sense that I've only read about them at a cursory level. And I think when you read things at a high level, you'll see a lot of similarities, right? They all will promise to, talk about adaptability. They all talk about focusing on the customer value. They all talk about, reduced communication latencies between departments, right? Whether whatever you call it, it's what what it's doing is kind of the most important thing, right? And if you've seen Agile, right? Agile, the way it has evolved today to organizations, and again, program managers will tell you more about this than I can. It is a very evolved, if not mutated, process. And it's evolved because even across organizations, or even across departments in the same organization, agile or any process does not look the same to you. It'll have its own variations in how people communicate, how people do it, how people plan, set metrics, and so on, right? So when I look at these practices, I try to see what is the practical thing versus the tooling and process. I think Agile Manifesto's original thing was, people over process, process over tools, I believe. So what is this valuing X over Y, right?
Yeah.
I think if you were to take Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi as as a great example, use what works, right? Take the best of everything, avoid the worst of everything, right? And then obviously backs in, backs out.
Yeah, I had somebody earlier on the podcast like a couple months ago, and he had an idea of Agile as a discipline. And all these frameworks, all these tools, it's all just you pick and choose what works for your organization, for your particular case, for your team. And people taking all these frameworks and applying all over the place. Like take a coach, right? They learn a couple of frameworks. They go from organization to organization, implement everything as a cookie cutter. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Smart coach, though, they will figure out which ones to use and so forth. So there's all kind of situations that people run into, and that's why some people hate it, some people love it. So it depends, where you go and what you do with these tools.
And context matters, right? The technique that worked really well for Google may not work for LinkedIn or Microsoft. In fact, what worked for Google Cloud may not work for Google Ads. In fact, what worked for Google Cloud today may not work for them in 2 years' time, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the good, smart coaches, and by the way, when I say coaches, I've seen amazing TPMs who have driven this change internally at these big companies, right? So did they have a designation as a coach? I don't know. But they were able to kind of take this, look at what's happening around, look at what the organizational politics and situations were, what the culture was, and then adapt to what worked. Some organizations will always talk about, we want you to commit to, this example, right? We want you to commit to 80% of what you can do, and then achieve at least 90%. So that way you are over-promising, over-delivering and under-promising. Some organizations actually want you to commit to 150% and then hit 120. Now, whether it's to induce a certain sense of heat is unclear. Like just having those kind of guiding principles means what goes in your backlog is going to change, right?
Yeah.
You'll either find that you'll start packing the backlog with more sandbagged, items, right? Or you might actually find that your backlog is growing over time because you're taking more and you're okay to fail with things you've taken on, right?
Yeah.
So agile with a capital A is scary. Agile with a small a as a verb and a principle. Yeah, it's always welcome.
Yeah. All right, we're coming to an end here. Great conversation. And at the end, I wanted to ask you if you have any sort of advice for engineers, leaders, product people, whatever maybe we haven't covered yet.
One of the things that I've always seen engineers, leaders, basically everyone, right, do is assume or make assumptions on what is possible from partner teams, right? I think it's a very common symptom where teams will take on something. They may have a rough idea that there's a dependency somewhere. They'll assume that it'll be done without securing a proper formal commitment, right? And it's not just about getting a email saying I'm committing. It's also there also needs to be systems and processes in place so the asking team can track that commitment frequently from the team being asked, right? And be able to escalate in a safe manner if and when necessary, right? And also, I would say that escalations are not a bad thing. You got to think of escalations in a clean way where you're doing it as a collaboration rather than as a conflict, right? I think when you look at this commitment and escalation process as a solid tool in your tool belt, that makes planning easy, delivering easy, building and innovation easy, right? And at a more selfish level, when you deliver what you committed to, it helps you grow it helps you grow in your careers.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you very much for your time. A lot of good information and insights. That's been great.
It was very nice chatting with you. I had a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope we can talk more in the future.
No, definitely,
so
man.
That was great. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers.